The predestination of this man from birth was marked by signs that were completely incomprehensible how to clarify. Either the chosen one of heaven, or this case is a curse. The name Saddam in Arabic means one who confronts or powerful collider. Today, let us tell you about diabolical things which committed Saddam Hussein. Secret Chronicles here, and so we continue this episode. Father of the future announcer disappeared from sight long before the boy was even born. The mother, having already lost her eldest son during childbirth, tried to have an abortion, and after this unsuccessful attempt, they tried to commit suicide altogether. Once, in spite of Providence, Saddam was born, the mother simply put the child on the ground, deciding not to even touch the baby. The little boy was saved by his uncle, Hayrallah Tulfa, who took little Saddam to his family. By the way, the name was also given to little boy by his uncle. So, from childhood, Saddam lived under the influence of his uncle, who was an officer in Iraqi army, distinguished by sanctitude and devotion to God, but at the same time hated Shiite Muslims and Jews. It was exactly Hayrallah who made the boy visible in society and showed him how things worked in this world. During the Second World War, his uncle was arrested for trying to organize a rebellion against the British, and Saddam was forced to return to his mother, who lived with a man named Hassan Ibrahim, who was nicknamed Liar Hassan. The stepfather beat his stepson, forced him to steal, and when Saddam refused to do what his stepfather forced him to do, he again picked up a stick. Consequently, when his uncle was finally released, Saddam immediately ran back to him. In Tikrit, where his uncle lived, the boy went to school without a single thought. But despite this initiative, he was the worst in academic performance, but the very central figure when it came to tricks and cruel pranks. For one example, to a teacher of the Quran, the boy put a snake in the holy book. In the 1950s, Iraqi peasants lived in very harsh conditions. An education and skill set could be a way out of poverty, but Saddam failed to finish school, as well as failed to enter the military academy, so he soon set foot on a criminal path, even being put on trial for complicity in murder. But to the delight of the young men, there was no evidence of his direct guilt, so he was released. Approximately by this time, revolutionary uprisings began in the Arab East. Tired of the colonization of the British, the states declared independence one after another. The first to succeed was Nasser in Egypt, who invited the brothers to unite into one Arab state. In Iraq, the Al-Ba'ath Party was a supporter of unification, in the ranks of which Hussein himself joined. True, the organized assassination attempt on General Abdul Qasim, who replaced the deposed king and began repression against the Al-Ba'ath, failed through the fault of Saddam Hussein, who opened fire on the car too early. As a result, he, along with his companions, had to flee abroad, to Egypt. It must be said that Hussein very thoughtfully used his own failure for the sake of PR. In Iraq, there were legends how, being wounded, he cut a bullet out of his body and, overcoming pain, swam across the Tigris River, reaching Syria. From there, Hussein went to Egypt, where he received his secondary education and even entered Cairo University. After the coup, when Hussein's cousin came to power in Iraq, Saddam returned to his homeland, where he slowly began to take for himself what he wanted. For example, when he decided to become a lawyer, he came with a gun to the rector of the University of Baghdad. It should be noted here that in Iraq there was an almost puzzling contradiction. Most of the population were Shiites Muslims. Hussein himself was a Sunni being brought up by his uncle, and Kurds lived in the north of the country, who demanded their own autonomy. And this is where Saddam Hussein was finally noticed by public, having received the post of vice president. He was given the task of agreeing. The cunning Saddam at first deceived the Kurds, persuading them to lay down their firearms. But he decided not to stand on ceremony with the Shiites at all, having accepted hatred from his uncle, and arranged a real hell for them just in Baghdad, without taking into account other cities and regions. Shiites were tortured with electricity, shot in the prison yard, and Hussein himself, according to the memoirs of the survivors, did not stand aside and also helped his wards. It is known, for example, how he personally threw the body of one of the leaders of the Shiites in acid and calmly watched as the body of the unfortunate man slowly dissolved. All of those who showed their opposition on the orders of Hussein were dealt with very, very cruelly. In addition to electric shocks and executions, Shiites and Kurds experienced such tortures that were known only in Nazi concentration camps, or, to be more precise, within the dungeons of the Gestapo. Many of those arrested were deprived of their sight simply by gouging out their eyes, and many were raped. In the torture chambers, analogs of the rack and other devices designed for twisting joints, crushing bones, and other horrific things were commonly used. Also, many mention the use of the so-called traditional torture, which was used in the East in ancient times. Those who were most unfortunate could be skinned alive or driven to madness by torture with boiling oil. These torture methods were and are considered one of the worst in the world. The crown of the condemned man was shaved, on which the dough was placed, gluing it tightly to the scalp, and then boiling oil was slowly poured into the created container. But to the casual observer or in public, Hussein acquired a brilliance. He regularly appeared on television. The locals saw not a weakened president, but a young and intelligent vice president who gave clever speeches. At the same time, Saddam completely pitted opponents against each other to get rid of them by means of their own hands. And Saddam himself created the image of a national hero who fights imperialism and extreme poverty. And finally, the precious moment. President Bakr publicly announced that he was retiring, leaving Saddam Hussein in his place. From that moment on, a new ruler appeared in Iraq, who began to prepare for an attack on Iran. True, the war itself turned out to be a failure for Hussein. At first, the occupied territories were recaptured, plus the Israelis bombed the nuclear power plant. But on the other hand, Hussein headed the operation to spray poisonous substances over the Kurdish city of Halbazdet, as a result of which at least 5,000 died on the spot and about 20,000 people remained disabled until the end of their days. But Hussein decided not to stop there, intending to deal with the Kurds completely. After peace was concluded with Iran, Operation Anfal was carried out in Iraq, during which Iraqi army soldiers arrested and deported at least 180,000 Kurdish men and boys. Where all these people were taken and what their fate was is still unknown. Only after the fall of Hussein's regime, near the city of Krikurka, the burial of about 300 children was discovered, many holding toys in their hands. To date, this is the only confirmation that all the Kurds who were taken out were brought to their end. By the way, the dictator's children simply copied their dad. Thus, the eldest and beloved son Uday, who led propaganda within Iraq, beat journalists for the slightest offenses with iron rods on their heels, and his sexual follies terrified even Hussein's supporters. So, Uday went to his mistresses on a tank, often satisfying his lust right in there, after which the unfortunate spoiled offspring could simply be thrown under the tracks. The madness of Hussein's son was also in the fact that even the wives of officers who faithfully served Saddam were not protected from his lustful look. True, for the sake of justice, it must be said that the father, unable to withstand the tricks of his son, decided to punish him, sending him, no, not to prison, but to Switzerland. By the way, the dishonored wives and relatives of the wives tried several times to kill Hussein's son, eventually managing to damage his spine with a bullet. The list of hysteria in the famous dad was no less than that of his son. With external well-being in the country, both Kurds and Shiites disappeared all at once. To date, the total number of victims of the dictator's regime has not been established. The end of his reign began when Iraq attacked Kuwait. It was from this moment that Hussein's star rolled down. And after the terrible terrorist act, the whole world categorically stated that it was Saddam Hussein who was to blame for this distressing crime. Incidentally, the dictator himself did not admit the accusation, and in order to protect himself, he even ordered to write the Quran, in which his own blood was to be used instead of ink. As you know, the fate of the dictator was decided after the United States launched a military operation against Iraq. Both of Hussein's sons were killed in a shootout. The eldest returned to their homeland shortly before the war, and Saddam Hussein himself was arrested and put on trial. This very day, for some reason it is forgotten, but the first unequivocally proven accusation was Hussein's direct guilt in the execution of 148 Shiites. That alone was enough to impose the death penalty. And in reality, Saddam Hussein's guilt in the ruthless destruction of tens of thousands of people is simply undeniable. Of course, the Kurds and Shiites were most happy about the trial, demanding the death penalty exactly during the broadcast. Thank you for watching our episode. Don't hesitate and subscribe to this channel and leave a like. And we'll see you in the next episode on Secret Chronicles.